What is space? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is space? Are they just coordinates on the grid? Do they just tell us that there's distance between objects? That's basically what physics says space is in the third dimension, is just matter has coordinates on the grid of the physics reality. And it's mainly there to produce essentially motion parallax, which is movement relative to other objects. And that all of the derivative calculations of those relative movements, being the ratios and the forces and all the descriptions of motion and momentum and inertia of matter in the third dimensional grid, that's basically physics on the just like almost strictly material level, right? So like when philosophers first start asking questions about what's space, they're thinking of from that perspective. And then Einstein comes in and he goes, hey, there's like more dimensions. It's like higher level physics at play sort of influence these third dimensional physics, because relativity is sort of the bridge into that. Because relativity it can make things very surreal because the interactions start getting very like stirred up. And then that's where the mathematics of derivatives and integrals and calculus sort of get born out of those very fluid interactions that start happening in sort of the higher levels of 3D. And then when we get out of the atmosphere of Earth, even those physics basically just cease, because then all of the numbers of the matrix calculations of the physics completely change, and all the laws of physics basically change. Like gravity goes out the window pretty much, which is pretty crazy. All sorts of things. And so by mathematical analysis between like physics in the space on the ground and physics in the space outside of the Earth's atmosphere, you realize you already have two different dimensions going on side by side. Like there's physical reason that's occurring, like the atmosphere, but the analysis leaves one irrefutable set of facts and conclusions, which is that they're two separate dimensions and they operate by different laws of physics. Furthermore, when you go into the space of water, the physics also change. They're still extrapolated from terrestrial physics, but they still change. And like basic things like propagation of light, you go 100 feet down in the water, light doesn't travel as much, life evolves with less light, physics change, like other physics change, right? So now we can see that as you travel through different forms of the space, that the dimensions change, right? So you can keep doing that. You can extrapolate. That's why metaphysics, which is the next leap up from, let's say you go from like Newtonian physics of space to like Einsteinian physics of space. Now it's ready to go into like, because quantum gives you the mathematical understanding for the metaphysics, and the metaphysics opens up to the languages of the yogis and the sages and the mystics and the messiahs and all those people and all the great scriptures and the illuminated manuscripts and all these things. They're really just bringing in quantum. They need quantum to come in and get their back, basically, to do the rational side, empirical scientific proof of it, just like we did with terrestrial physics, and then space physics, astrophysics, and then quantum physics is metaphysics. So, but they're all explorations of space, and we're basically just doing full spectrum data analysis on areas of space. Space is as the fundamental fabric of that reality, not space as in like what your conventional idea of it is. just to get to the core sampling of the space. And if you're taking the fundamental metrics of it, you can do it. And right, so so you have these overtones of the space. Okay, so now if we pull back, so now we've seen that like this is sort of what's in the consciousness as far as space goes in broad strokes, right? So now we pull out and we go, okay, what is space, right? Because this is philosophy, so we're just trying to get to the essentially like godlike overview of the thing. If we can get to, that's kind of the goal of philosophy, is to get like clarity is the best way to put it, but it's a universal clarity from sort of a prime creation perspective. So like what is space in terms of like the whole thing? So we go back to the moment of creation where all of creation is sort of in that cosmic egg, that sphere. Before, like, so around it is nothingness, the void, and the void doesn't have space. The void is devoid of anything. Like we know that's it's the abyss. So as the Big Bang or the explosion or the first movement or whatever you want to call that moment where creation comes into being, that's when space begins to get propagated. Right? Just the concept of it expanding is what space is. Just that concept itself of the moment of it going from potential and the very, however you want to think of that, whatever the next movement is that allows for the growth or the expansion or the expulsion of creation itself, that to me is fundamentally, that's what space is. It's just that concept. Because in reality, it doesn't matter if it actually happened or not. It doesn't matter. Like, it's infinity, right? So it doesn't even matter if the space actually went out, because a lot of science, when you come back down into it, says that it's an illusion. They were just sort of all quantum superimposed, basically like in the same dot. It's just all the space is an illusion, because all of the way all the dimensions are interlaced and overlatticed and all this stuff, they seem to be simultaneously like completely solid and have space, right? But in terms of the traditional idea of space, the moment that creates the creation expanded to give birth to itself, it's that concept itself, just because there was no thought of anything when it was happening. Like, it happened, and then it was like it came into realization as it occurred. It just felt probably like tension or whatever. It probably felt these things about to burst in whatever way it felt, and then it happened, and then in that moment it grew and it knew it needed space. And like, but so the concept and the action were born at the same time in that one sort of genesis moment, right? So in that sense, so even if you let it just be more in the material realm of it now, and it goes from that moment, it sort of just becomes like a huge space bubble or sort of cosmic amniotic sac. Probably be more appropriate, because it's just, then it becomes this like life-giving energetic field that starts to propagate out into the void, and within it life can exist. We know that. Like, that seems to be fundamental to all human thought systems, just that however creation began, it was basically in this like sort of void that's like the most barren thing imaginable. You can't even like really articulate what it is because it's so devoid of anything. That there was like this flash, and then this sort of like sack of the amniotic sac of life sort of just went out, almost like a big, huge electromagnetic jellyfish. And just within those realms, like whatever's inside that, coming emanating from the source energy, and this all space coming out around it, that life can happen in there. And that's sort of like what the miracle of life actually is. It's just that the light gave birth to this space in the void. And it seems as though most of the human like great minds have, when they've been grappling with space, they're trying to figure out more from like the material reality in instead of like the outside in. But now we've had enough successive generations of people figuring out what space is, from like regular 3D to 4D to sort of, mathematicians can link a bunch of the dimensions of space through, string theory. They have math to back that up. There's people who've been cracking algorithms that basically, I would say, kind of almost provide the spine for superstring theory, which makes sense because if you write the right equation, you're really just trying to deduce like where we are from now and back engineer the space propagation back to source. So if there was some way to sort of detect whatever the core frequency that was pulsating through time and space, it'd be like the same thing. Then you get in connection with source. Um, so in that sense, like, yeah, that's sort of like the whole. It's like a river of life, basically. Just macro electrical engineering, really. Um, and it's cool because we live in a time now where the math is kind of done on it, and so now we have orthodox scientific accounts due to quantum mechanics and all this other stuff, and then we have the human accounts of what's going on because we have all the yogis and meditators and just really smart people and just all kinds of human accounts of these levels, right? People with near death experiences, people with like just the whole range of experiences, right? All these things that gave them these higher dimensional experiences or visions or whatever you want to call them. And then on this side, the science, because of quantum computing and like huge neural networks and their experimentation with AI and all this other stuff, uh, you know, they came into knowledge like in that way, and so bring them together. And I think that's one of the functions of space too. So if space is this thing that provides life, the other thing too is like, okay, what else does it do? Well, I think it does provide all the 3D things. It does provide us a space like a body to have, and we can have coordinates on the grid, and then we can have distance from things, and we can have motion and energy and fun, and have material life, which is super enjoyable, in good stretches, and space accommodates for that. And then in knowledge of that, knowing, like thinking that I know at least, or like philosophically accepting this continued conversation where the source energy is in the middle of this sort of like propagated space came out of it, and it's fueling everything in it with its energy. And now we know that through quantum and stuff that basically all the energy of the universe is like always essentially underlying our reality wherever we go. It's always like thinly behind everything. It's like, because we're not in the void, like we're in the life sack. It's just we're going through some fluctuations that are occurring within the reality, which metaphysically, I think the space is the experience, in that it can facilitate any amount of variation it wants because it is creation. The illusion is that it's like rock solid, like always has to be this way kind of thing. That's like, from a high scientific level, that's like almost laughable now, because it's like really like the reality is like way more fluid. It's way more in line with this sort of like propagated energy bubble that's just being fueled by like a miracle light, which is, I mean, it is what it is. And uh so and scientists are always like, oh man, like, oh great, now there's a molecule, it just does whatever it wants, right? But the thing is, like, it's all space. Like, there's no division of it, because all the things that exist within the space, they're really technically part of space too. Like, people will have a tendency to want to talk about space as like, oh, it's just like the hollow point between objects. Well, I don't think so anymore. I don't think so. I think it's because of the wave particle thing, and everything's frequency. So basically, it's just like the appearance of like empty areas of space. That's an illusion. Um, there's all kind. I mean, it's just like the whole thing is just like a mesh. It's just what kind of like whatever you're tuning into. Kind of reminds me of those things in toy stores would have all the pins, and you can like put it on your hand, and then you can see it. It's like the handprint, or you put your face in it. It's like it's kind of like the reality is like I'm seeing it, it's way more like that. Like this electromagnetic mesh is more what the space is. It's just I think this conversation's been being had in like layers as like successive generations figured out layers of space and everything, and it seems now we're in an era where it's because all the great minds have done all the work and we've been able to read up on stuff. Yeah, it appears it's just sort of like it's a combo, like that these dimensions are layered in, and penetrating the layers and becoming conscious of them can help. It seems help activate them or bring them more to life, bring more of this. It's almost like electrical engineering. The more you put the acknowledge what it is in the reality, the more it can have energy come through it. And I think that's one of the functions of space is that it sort of physically collates concepts and objects, sort of like how Plato talks about his like the ideal plane and all that. So I think that acknowledgement of space in this manner, I think it helps allow for the manifestation of like those ideal planes and concepts better. It's philosophical of whether it can be all the way in or whatever. Um, but in terms, can it bring into a high degree of enjoyability that completely satisfies the human senses? I think yes. And I think just understanding what space is, so that we understand that. I mean, let's be real. Like, if you get to walk around in the creation knowing what it is, that's the best. I think. I mean, that's why I got into philosophy. I was like, man, how does the whole shebang work? How does all creation work? Uh, and philosophy helped prepare me to be able to receive the answers, which do lead you into undeniably spiritual realms. But the philosophy is totally sufficient to be like an amazing human being enjoying creation and loving it, and it does provide answers when you ask the right questions. So yeah, in terms of space, the layering of it is essential. But yeah, it also is an illusion, which is in line with quantum, man. It's the wave particle is both. Until it's like whatever you pay your attention to makes it the particle. Whatever you pay your attention to in the space makes it more solid. And so just concentration on it. And that's really what these talks are about. They're just concentrating on a topic for a bit and you know get into it, think for yourself, and just get that sharing the intelligence. And which is it's this infinite intelligence, which is embedded in the space. That's the other part of it too. Is within the space itself, once you know that it is the intelligent creation itself, like we're not detached from the actual moment of creation. Like this is it. We're the intention of creation. We're still in it. It never stops. It's always like fresh in that regard. And so when we know that as human beings, we can tap into it. And then it basically can pop up like infinite intelligence. Instead of AI, you get II. And you can walk around and just be tapped into creation itself, and yeah, that's when life begins. All right, I hope you're having a good time in space.